Ethan and Marissa Cole seemed like ordinary parents rushing their infant to the hospital until doctors pulled a tiny metal capsule from the baby's throat, uncovering a secret that would unravel one of the most disturbing criminal networks the town had ever seen. It was close to midnight when the call came through to the Milford Police Department. The voice on the other end was trembling and rushed, reporting that their baby boy wasn't breathing. The dispatcher could hear muffled sobs and the sound of hurried footsteps in the background. Every second counted, and an ambulance was dispatched immediately, accompanied by a pair of patrol officers who happened to be only a few streets away. Milford was a quiet place. The kind of town where sirens at night usually meant a loose dog or a fender bender. But the urgency in that call felt different, more desperate, more frantic. When the ambulance arrived, the small white house looked calm from the outside. No lights flashed from inside, no neighbors were in the street. Yet the moment the paramedics stepped through the door, the air changed. The living room smelled faintly of antiseptic, as if someone had recently tried to clean something. On the couch, wrapped in a faded yellow blanket, lay the infant. His skin was pale, lips faintly bluish. His chest rose and fell in quick, shallow movements. The mother was standing rigid near the wall, arms crossed tightly, eyes darting between the medics and the officers. The father paced the corner, muttering under his breath. One of the paramedics quickly checked the baby's mouth and airway. There was no visible obstruction, no toy, no food, yet his breathing was strained, almost like something was blocking him deep inside. The medic's brow furrowed. He asked how it had happened, and the parents gave clipped, almost mechanical answers. They claimed the baby had been lying in his crib when he suddenly gasped for air and began wheezing. They said they had tried to clear his throat but found nothing. Their story was smooth but strangely cold, lacking the frantic panic most parents would show in such a moment. While the medics prepared to transport the child, one of the officers scanned the room. He noticed that the baby's crib was pushed into a corner against the wall, almost hidden behind a dresser. The bedding was unusually sparse, just a thin sheet. On a nearby shelf, there were no typical signs of a newborn's life. No toys, no bottles, no clutter of diapers or wipes. Just a few neatly stacked blankets, all folded the same way. Something about the house felt staged, as if it had been prepared for inspection rather than lived in. The baby let out a weak, wheezing cry that cut through the stillness. It was short and labored, like every breath was a battle. The lead paramedic glanced at the officers, shaking his head slightly, signaling urgency. Within moments, the child was strapped into a transport cradle and carried to the waiting ambulance. The father followed quickly, but the mother hesitated, glancing once toward the back of the house before stepping outside. As the siren wailed into the night, one officer stayed behind to take notes. The parents' stiff body language, the odd cleanliness of the home, and the absence of typical baby items all pressed at the back of his mind. Something about this wasn't right. What had started as a medical emergency was beginning to feel like the opening line of a much darker story. At the hospital, the emergency team moved fast, wheeling the baby through double doors and into a brightly lit trauma room. Nurses connected him to monitors, the green lines flickering urgently with each shallow breath. The doctor on duty leaned over, carefully tilting the infant's head back and peering into his mouth. The airway looked clear at first glance, but the child's gasps suggested something deeper, something hidden from view. A respiratory specialist was called in, and a small camera probe was prepared. When the scope slid into the baby's throat, the image on the monitor revealed something unexpected. Nestled far down in the airway, almost at the entrance to the windpipe, was a tiny glint of metal. It was not jagged, not the kind of thing a baby could have accidentally bitten or swallowed. It was positioned too deep to have gotten there without deliberate effort. The doctor's expression hardened. With extreme care, a pair of specialized forceps was threaded in. The metallic object resisted slightly before coming free, coated in mucus and a thin layer of black, tar-like residue. On the tray, under the harsh fluorescent lights, The object appeared to be a miniature capsule, round at one end, flat at the other, no larger than a fingernail. The medical staff exchanged uneasy glances. There was no logical reason for such a thing to be inside an infant's airway. The doctor opened the capsule using sterilized tweezers. Inside was a strip of paper, tightly rolled and barely thicker than a thread. As it was unrolled, a series of numbers and letters appeared, neatly printed in a precise, almost mechanical font. It didn't resemble a hospital code, a serial number, or anything that would make sense in a medical context. The police officer who had followed the ambulance into the hospital stepped closer to the tray, taking note of every detail. His instincts told him this was not an isolated incident. The residue on the capsule had a chemical smell, faint but sharp, the kind associated with industrial adhesives or protective coatings. This was not a child's toy, not a bead, not anything from a normal household. The fact that it had been placed in such a dangerous location suggested intent. Someone had wanted it hidden where no one would think to look. The baby, now breathing more freely, was stabilized and transferred to a quiet observation room. But the object itself became the center of attention. It was sealed in an evidence bag, and a call was made to the forensic unit for immediate analysis. The officer knew they were dealing with more than a strange medical case. Somewhere, there was a reason for that capsule to exist, a reason it had been inside a child. In another part of the hospital, two nurses whispered about how the parents had barely reacted to the removal of the object, offering no questions, no relief, just silence. Their detached behavior lingered in the minds of everyone present. The medical emergency had been resolved, but the sense of unease only deepened. Whatever had just been uncovered was only the surface of something far darker. The investigation into the parents began the same night. While the baby lay under observation, two detectives drove to the address listed on the intake forms and began combing through records. The mother's employment history stood out first. She had worked for a shipping and logistics company in the city, one that had been raided only 6 months earlier for smuggling rare gemstones across international borders. Though she had not been among those arrested, her resignation had been sudden, filed just days after the investigation began. Her work had involved processing overseas parcels, many of which were never opened before being sent on. The father's background was harder to pin down. On paper, he appeared unemployed for the last 2 years, but bank records showed small, frequent deposits from multiple sources, none of them regular employers. Immigration logs revealed that he had traveled to countries known for illegal trade in rare minerals and black market antiquities. None of the trips were linked to tourist visas. Every destination pointed toward places where smugglers thrived under weak customs enforcement. Detectives began canvassing the family's neighborhood. A retired neighbor across the street mentioned that she often saw people arriving late at night. They would knock once, enter quickly, and leave within minutes carrying small padded envelopes. The visitors rarely spoke, and their cars never stayed long enough to arouse attention until now. Another neighbor recalled seeing the father loading a package into the trunk of a car with out-of-state plates, despite claiming he had no job. A search warrant was quickly approved. When police entered the house, they found almost nothing personal. The kitchen cupboards were stocked with basic non-perishables, but the refrigerator was nearly empty. In the bedroom, the dresser drawers contained neatly folded clothing, but not in the variety expected of a young family. More disturbing was the baby's room. Aside from the crib and the few blankets officers had already seen, it was bare. No toys, no storybooks, no signs of a child actually living there. It felt like a prop, a space arranged to pass casual inspection without giving away its true purpose. In the back of the house, a small locked cabinet drew attention. Inside, wrapped in layers of plastic, were 6 small metal capsules identical in shape to the one removed from the baby's throat. Each capsule was empty, but the interiors bore the same chemical residue. Forensics later confirmed that the coating matched materials used to protect delicate items from moisture and corrosion during international shipping. It was clear now that the baby had been part of a smuggling process. The evidence raised chilling possibilities. The capsules were small enough to be concealed inside a child's body without triggering most scanning equipment. Someone had intentionally placed one in the baby's airway, betting that the risk would go unnoticed during travel. It wasn't just reckless, it was calculated. The detectives left the house with the cabinet's contents and a growing certainty that they were dealing with an organized network, one that had no hesitation using an infant as a shield for their crimes. The coated strip of paper from the capsule became the investigation's focal point. It was sent to the forensic lab along with the other capsules found in the house. Analysts confirmed that the residue inside all of them matched protective coatings used for high-value items, specifically gemstones and rare artifacts. But it was the sequence of letters and numbers on the strip that broke the case open. After hours of cross-referencing, a cryptography expert recognized the pattern as coordinates. When plotted on a map, the numbers pointed to an industrial area just outside Milford, home to a cluster of abandoned warehouses. A tactical team was assembled before dawn. By the time the first rays of sunlight broke over the rooftops, officers in unmarked vans were moving into position around a rusted warehouse at the far end of a gravel road. The building looked deserted, its corrugated walls streaked with rust, windows opaque with years of grime. But as the team drew closer, faint noises inside betrayed activity: footsteps, the clink of metal, the low rumble of machinery. When the door was breached, the scale of the operation became clear. Crates were stacked high against the walls, some open to reveal velvet-lined compartments filled with polished gemstones, carved ivory pieces, and ancient coins sealed in protective cases. Tables were covered with maps, shipping manifests, and rows of metal capsules identical to those recovered from the house. Nearby, a workbench held tools for opening and resealing the capsules, along with tiny medical instruments that suggested a disturbing purpose. Investigators documented everything, photographing and cataloging each piece of evidence. In one corner, a set of ledgers listed shipping schedules and destination codes. Many of the entries were marked with children's initials, alongside notations of flight numbers and arrival times. It was a chilling confirmation of what the detectives had feared: infants and young children were being used as couriers, the capsules hidden inside their bodies to avoid detection. The smugglers had exploited the assumption that babies posed no security threat, turning innocents into cover for an international trafficking network. Forensic teams worked through the morning, collecting fingerprints, DNA samples, and digital data from seized laptops. Some crates were already labeled for export, with customs paperwork forged to perfection. A few boxes were marked with a red priority stamp, indicating their contents were to be moved quickly. Inside these priority crates were smaller packages wrapped in moisture-resistant paper, suggesting the capsules could carry more than just codes, perhaps even micro-sized gemstones or other contraband that would be transferred at different points along the route. The warehouse was more than a storage site. It was a hub, a carefully controlled checkpoint where goods were prepared, hidden, and reassigned to different couriers. The sheer organization of the space hinted at a network that extended far beyond Milford. And if the ledgers were accurate, this building was only one of several similar sites across the country. The baby's near-death experience had not only exposed a crime, it had revealed the inner workings of an operation that thrived on secrecy, precision, and absolute disregard for human life. With the warehouse secured and the evidence loaded into police vans, the investigation shifted to tracking down the people behind the network. The parents were taken into custody, their silence as deliberate as their every previous move. No matter how many questions were asked, neither reacted with emotion or offered even the smallest detail. Their eyes remained fixed on the table during interrogation, as if they were waiting for something or someone to intervene. The breakthrough came from one of the men arrested inside the warehouse, a wiry figure with stained hands and an accent difficult to place. Faced with the sheer volume of evidence against him, he decided to talk. His account painted a picture darker than the detectives had imagined. The baby, he claimed, was not their biological child at all. He had been taken from another state months earlier, part of a group of infants stolen to serve as unwitting carriers in the smuggling operation. The parents were not parents in the traditional sense. They were handlers responsible for housing the child temporarily, ensuring the capsule remained hidden until it was time to move him along the route. The network's method was as cruel as it was calculated. Children were chosen for their age and vulnerability, then assigned to handlers posing as their guardians. The capsules would be implanted in ways that were difficult to detect without invasive examination: throats, nasal passages, even surgical placement under the skin. Once the child reached the destination, a second handler would retrieve the capsule and pass the child to another link in the chain or abandon them entirely. The smugglers relied on speed, secrecy, and the unlikelihood of thorough searches on infants during transit. For investigators, the scale of the operation was staggering. Ledgers recovered from the warehouse confirmed that dozens of children had been moved in this way, their names replaced by initials and tracking codes. Some entries showed completed transactions. Others, chillingly, were still active. The team's priority shifted to finding the remaining children before they could be moved again. Meanwhile, the rescued baby remained in protective custody under close medical observation. His recovery was slow but steady, each breath now unburdened by the object that had nearly killed him. Social services worked alongside law enforcement to locate his real parents. Weeks later, after combing through missing persons reports, they were found a young couple from another state whose infant had been abducted during a break-in. The reunion was tearful and overwhelming, though shadowed by the horror of what had been done. The case shocked the entire region. News outlets covered the story relentlessly, branding it one of the most disturbing criminal investigations in local history. The image of a tiny metal capsule, once hidden in the throat of a helpless child, became a symbol of both the cruelty of organized crime and the fragile line between safety and exploitation. While several arrests were made, authorities knew many members of the network were still out there, operating in the shadows. The baby's survival was a victory, but it was also a reminder sometimes the darkest secrets hide in the smallest, most unthinkable places.